Hello, I am Calvin Cherry. What are my favorite vampire novels, and how did they influence my own Dracula prequel, Stoker, Evolution of a Vampire? Keep watching to find out. I preface this clip by saying this video differs from all others I have done because the content is extremely subjective. I decided to pull my top 10 vampire novel list together mainly because I've been asked to share it for quite a long while. This was much more difficult to do than expected, simply because there are so many talented writers out there, and narrowing this list down to a final 10 is almost like asking Bram Stoker to provide his 10 favorite Henry Irving performances. And understand this is a list of vampire fiction or historical fiction. In other words, books about vampirism, biographies, literary analysis, or true crime in relation to vampirism were excluded from inventory. So without further ado, my top 10 vampire novels. Number 10, The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova, published in 2005. This bestseller blends the lore and stories of Vlad the Impaler with Count Dracula. I crave historical Gothic fiction, and this novel came along at a time when there was so much teenage romance vampire output on the shelf. I found this book to be refreshing and exciting. It would have been higher on my list if the story could have kept its momentum throughout its entirety, which is well over 600 pages. Number 9, Varney the Vampire, or The Feast of Blood by James Malcolm Rymer, published in 1847. This is a collection of penny dreadful stories that were eventually published together in a single text. It is an early classic, original plot, and certainly deserves reading if one can get past the difficult dialect in which it was written. Even though the characters are intriguing and the action kept me engaged, I did find myself rereading entire paragraphs throughout the long story due to the challenging writing style. Number 8, Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Lee Fanu, published in 1872. This is an interesting female vampire novella that predates Dracula by 26 years. It is a well-written example of a Gothic horror masterpiece every vampire enthusiast should read at least once. It has been adapted into at least 15 films, though some very loosely, while others the connection is limited only to the vampire's name. Number 7, The Vampyre by John Polidori, published in 1819. This story was conjured up the same night Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was born. It is an exceptional, atmospheric, chilling tale that precedes Dracula by 78 years, and it is the oldest on my list. This short is one of the earliest examples proving you don't have to deliver a fast-paced James Bondish storyline or over-the-top gore to be a Gothic classic. Number 6, The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice, published in 1985. American author Anne Rice is a well-known modern-day Gothic vampire lore bestseller that has written numerous novels on the subject, and several of her stories have been adapted to the big screen and even the stage. The Vampire Lestat is my personal favorite because it is narrated by Lestat de Lioncourt himself and tells of his numerous world-traveling adventures with his partner Louis de Pointe-du-Lac. Number 5, Dracula in Istanbul, the unauthorized version of the Gothic classic. Originally published in 1928, by Bram Stoker and Ali Reza Stagfulug, translation published in 2017. This book was an amazing discovery for me, and I must stop and recognize my friend and fellow vampire enthusiast, Raphael Zambini, for telling me about it. This is an abbreviated rewrite of Dracula by a Turkish writer 31 years after Bram Stoker's publication in 1897. Unlike the Icelandic version, this rework follows much of Stoker's abridged text while removing secondary characters like Renfield and Morris to condense it down to 139 pages. The trip back to Transylvania does not happen, which is somewhat of a disappointment. However, there are many positives which must be considered. Number one, Dracula relocates to Istanbul instead of London. Number two, the Count is originally considered to be a descendant of Vlad III, but then realized to be Vlad the Impaler once his undead nature is fully revealed. At present, this is the first known version to tie the fictional Count to the historical Dracula. Another fascinating fact is the ever-growing popularity of this Turkish version, resulted in a Turkish film being made in 1953. Oddly enough, it never got translated into English until 2017, triggered by the success of the Icelandic version becoming available several years earlier. Number 4, Dracula the Undead by Dacre Stoker and Ian Hope, published in 2009. This is a sequel to Bram Stoker's Dracula, written by his great-grandnephew and a Hollywood screenwriter. Several familiar characters from Bram Stoker's novel return to not only face the resurrection of Dracula, but also an infamous blood countess. Several characters that were in Bram Stoker's working notes, which did not make their way into his masterpiece, also join the cast. The book is jam-packed with fast-paced action, over-the-top gore, and controversial ideals that many new readers enjoy. I must say it was difficult at times to see the return of many beloved characters of Bram Stoker's Dracula behaving in ways that contradict their personalities in the original. This proves to show even our strongest heroes are people too, and life can unhinge even the best of them. Number 3, Dracula by Dacre Stoker and J.D. Barker, published in 2018. This is a prequel to Bram Stoker's Dracula, written by his great-grandnephew and a best-selling horror writer. Using Bram Stoker's notes, journal, Dracula's guest, and bits and pieces of Bram Stoker's family history, this story follows a young Bram and other supporting family members down a harrowing journey that involves Bram guarding a mysterious door in a castle tower. There is something very dark behind it, and as the story backtracks and subplots get connected, you will find yourself unable to put this book down. Seriously, I read this book from cover to cover in a day and a half, stopping only to sleep. If the audience for the sequel was targeted toward a younger audience, this modern-day Gothic gem was targeted toward a mature audience, as it is told through Bram Stoker's eyes and written much in the same style as Dracula. This novel is a page-turner, filled with mystery, thrills, and suspense, and keeps you on edge all the time. I must add that this prequel was published the same year as my prequel. Though the same underlying ideas, approach, style, passion, and delivery went into both prequels, the output is different. Where Dracula follows Bram Stoker in his 20s, accompanied by his sister and brother, my prequel follows Bram in his 40s, accompanied by his wife and son. So I'll often encourage fans to read Dracula, then my novel, Dracula, and then The Undead, in that order. Number 2, The Undead, the Dracula novel rewritten to include Stoker's deleted characters and events by Joel H. Emerson and Bram Stoker, the revised 2007 edition. Not to be confused with my number 4, Undead by Stoker and Holt, published in 2009. This novel is commonly referred to as the literary director's cut of Bram Stoker's Dracula by a debut writer from Kentucky. Emerson took all of Bram Stoker's notes, many of his other published works, and various other materials, such as Stoker's letters, newspaper articles concerning Jack the Ripper, different Dracula editions, such as the Atlantic version and Klinger's new annotated edition, and went to work. He was hard at it, as Dr. Seward would say, and God bless him for it. For this marvelous contribution to the Dracula legacy certainly paid off. This labor of love was an absolute joy to read. Every single page was a delight to my eyes. Emerson's additions to Stoker's unabridged text are so carefully crafted and painstakingly woven in at the most appropriate places, I often found myself questioning what was Stoker's versus Emerson's text. For anyone who has studied Stoker's working notes for Dracula, it is understood the final manuscript did not contain many of the characters, plot twists, events, or even the opening chapter that was originally planned. If you are like me, many Stoker enthusiasts have wondered for years what this director's cut might have looked like. I believe Emerson answered that call beautifully. For example, Stoker's list of characters on page 7 of his notes mention a painter named Francis A. Eyetown, along with a comment on page 4 stating that painters cannot paint him. Their likenesses always like someone else. Emerson brilliantly introduces this character into the opening Whitby Bay chapter as the suspect boyfriend of Kate Reed, another added character Mina knows from school. Francis paints Dracula from afar and pens Dracula a note closely resembling the letter Bram Stoker wrote to Walt Whitman. Francis's painting efforts become very reminiscent of the hellish, grotesque one from Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Of course, Bram Stoker and Oscar Wilde knew one another, as they were both writers from Dublin and went to Trinity College. Bram spent much time with Oscar's parents, and Oscar was even engaged to Bram's wife, Florence, before she settled on Bram. I bring this up because there have been entire books dedicated to Bram's connection with Oscar, some going as far as stating every time the word wild was used in the text of Dracula, it was Bram saying hello to Oscar in prison. So Emerson's character development of the closeted Eyetown painter goes much deeper than the deleted personality in Stoker's working notes. This goes beyond good writing. This is superb writing. Number 1, Dracula by Bram Stoker, published in 1897. The Leslie S. Klinger 2008 New Annotated Edition. What can I possibly say about this novel which has not already been said? Personally, I believe it is the greatest Gothic psychological horror novel ever written. I reread it every year, always with new eyes, and never tire of it. There has been countless thesis papers, books, and debates regarding the symbolism and hidden themes of Dracula, a topic I would like to tackle in detail on its own video. But for now, I just want to reiterate why this masterpiece has been my number 1 since age 7. So when I was 7, I read a children's illustrated classic take on the novel and was completely captivated by the story. I then read an abridged children's version when I was 13, which just further fed my ever-growing curiosity and love for the tale. In my 20s, I read the unabridged adult version and was so wonderfully overwhelmed and taken aback by it, I made it my lifelong passion to study it, read everything I could find about Bram Stoker, the historical Dracula, and all things vampire related. The pages of Dracula are filled with practically every emotion and reason why people read in the first place. Travel, mystery, science, thrills, suspense, history, love, knowledge, fear, humor, friendship, mortality. I could go on and on. I encourage you to revisit two passages. First, Jonathan Harker's description of what he sees while he is leaning out the window of his castle prison. This is so well written, I get goosebumps every time I read it. So, from chapter 3. I drew back behind the stonework and looked carefully out. What I saw was the Count's head coming out from the window. I did not see the face, but I knew the man by the neck and the movement of his back and arms. In any case, I could not mistake the hands, which I had had so many opportunities of studying. I was at first interested and somewhat amused, for it is wonderful how small a matter will interest and amuse a man when he is a prisoner. But my very feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole man slowly emerge from the window and began to crawl down the castle wall over that dreadful abyss, face down, with his cloak spreading out around him like great wings. At first, I could not believe my eyes. I thought it was some trick of the moonlight, some weird effect of shadow, but I kept looking, and it could be no delusion. I saw the fingers and toes grasp the corners of the stones, worn clear of the mortar by the stress of years, and by thus using every projection and inequality, move downwards with considerable speed, just as a lizard moves along a wall. What manner of man is this? Or what manner of creature is it in the semblance of man? I feel the dread of this horrible place overpowering me. I am in fear, in awful fear. And there is no escape for me. I am encompassed about with terrors that I dare not think of. This paragraph still evokes the same bone-chilling sensation as it did for me 40 years ago. Secondly, I encourage you to reread the description of Lucy Westendra's tomb from chapter 15. The tomb in the daytime and wreathed with fresh flowers had looked grim and gruesome enough. But by now, some days afterwards, when the flowers hung lank and dead, their whites turning to rust and their greens to browns, when the spider and the beetle had resumed their accustomed dominance, and time discolored stone and dust-encrusted mortar, rusty, dank iron, tarnished brass, and clouded silver plating gave back the feeble glimmer of a candle, the effect was more miserable and sordid than could have ever been imagined. It conveyed irresistibly the idea that life, animal life, was not the only thing which could pass away. This beautifully written passage moves me in a way which is quite difficult to explain. It first dazes me with melancholy, and then I begin to question my own mortality. Next, I go and hug someone to celebrate the fact that I am still of this world, and then I begin to recall the people I have lost over the years while treasuring those memories. These brief examples are just two of many that remind us of the impeccable talent of Bram Stoker. There are countless, pun intended, versions of Bram Stoker's masterpiece. However, I recommend Klinger's new annotated edition because of its 1,500 footnotes, which take you on a secondary journey through the myriad of notes, manuscripts, editions, and backstory of practically every facet of the novel. It also includes recent revelations about the cast of characters, copious illustrations, historical maps, Victorian-era oddities, and the science of blood transfusion. I would like to point out that this list is not a be-all, end-all answer. New books are published daily. At any given moment, I have at least 3 books I am presently reading, while 3 more are on order. Contenders such as I Am Legend, Salem's Lot, Let the Right One In, and The Strain were once on this list, but then got bumped out to share the love. So how did these books tie in with my novel, Stoker, Evolution of a Vampire? My historical fictional prequel to Dracula follows the conceptualization of Dracula. The Vampyre, Varney, and Carmilla were all published prior to Bram Stoker beginning researching his novel and have been classified as important influence in the creation of Dracula. Therefore, I reread these classics, including Stoker's notes and source materials, as I began to plan my prequel. This wealth of knowledge all got carefully woven into my book. Stoker, Evolution of a Vampire, delves deeply into vampire mythology and merges the life and times of Bram Stoker and Vlad the Impaler into an action-packed mystery thriller written in the same Gothic Victorian style, paying homage in respect to Bram's masterpiece. Elements from many of these books found their way into my own passages, as I, like Stoker, made extensive notes on passages, characters, elements of history, plot development, atmospheric conditions, and fear-driven descriptions that found their way into my manuscript. My novel is available at all online book retail stores. If you go into a brick-and-mortar store and it is not available, they will be more than glad to order it for you. Finally, if you would like a signed copy, please private message me and I will be more than happy to oblige. So, further reading for today, any of the novels previously mentioned. I hope this list provides ideas for your next vampire read, or perhaps reminds you it might be time to revisit an old classic. Please comment below on your own favorites, as I am always looking for new sources of inspiration and very interested in what other vampire enthusiasts are excited about. As always, if you found this topic interesting, please like and subscribe to my channel so you can be informed of other videos just like this. Thank you so very much for watching. Go take a bite out of life. I will see you next time. Goodbye, my friends.